can you stay on the line because we need to get Claire on the line now?
Yes, good.
Okay, thank you so much for sharing that because I had no idea that this was going. That is just so sick.
And it's
Thank you.
on today. As Claire will give you a more recent story.
Oh, okay, great. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So now I'm going to be calling Claire live. Let's hope that this is going to work okay.
Is it working?
Hold on. Here we go.
Hello?
Hello, Claire. It's Deborah. You're on the God Discussion Show. How are you tonight?
Hi, Deborah. I'm doing good, thanks. How are you doing?
Well, I'm sitting here in a little bit of shock over the stories that we have heard so far from Satay and also from Nancy Maney. She was just talking about how children are treated within Scientology.
Yes.
So, as I don't know if you heard our show notes, but we're kind of devoting 15 minutes for everybody's story, and then we'll have an open forum. But can you tell us a little bit about your story, or maybe what you feel is important to share group right now?
Yes, absolutely. Well, just as background, my mother joined the SEA organization when I was 4 years old. So that was essentially my introduction to Scientology. I was in the cadet organization from the age of 4 until age 10. The cadet organization is where they put children of SEA organization members while their parents then work, very long hours, 7 days a week.
Do children have to work that long too, or is it mostly the parents that do that?
The children don't work the same hours as adults, but I can tell you, certainly growing up in the cadet organization is no ordinary childhood by any stretch of the imagination. I mean, I was, number one, there's no parent involvement. It's very little adult supervision from a very young age, and because of that, they had a lot of health problems and later behavioral problems with the children in the cadet organization. I would, from the age of 5 going to school, I would come home and be required to work doing menial labor type tasks after school, and then we would study an hour of Scientology materials. That was mandatory, and it was a very regimented schedule from a very young age. We'd have musters. I was at age 7. I was responsible for supervising 6 other children to make sure that they were doing what they were supposed to be doing at any given time of the day.
At 7 years old,
yes.
You had to. Oh, and Nancy had mentioned one thing during her segment that children are considered to have like eternal souls, so they're like adults in little tiny bodies, and they're responsible
Absolutely.
for everything. So you
yes.
had that burden of responsibility for yourself when you're 7, and having to take care of other little kids.
Yes, and I will say, obviously, since escaping from Scientology, I've had my own children, and at every turn, it has been an extreme process of realizing the extremes of my own childhood, because obviously growing up in it, I had no perspective. It's not like I was born knowing, these are the factors that make up a happy childhood. This is how you should raise a child, and this is how you should not raise a child. Obviously, I had no perspective. It was just, this was my life as I knew it. But when my first son turned 4, it was a real slap in the face and a shocker to realize, wow, that was how old I was when my mother joined the SEA organization, and what that really meant.
Good. I didn't even think about that, how that would translate into having your own children right now.
Right.
Is your mother still in this quote church, end quote, or
yes,
or
she
is?
Yeah, she's never met my sons, who are her first grandchildren. She will have no contact with us. When I was in labor at the hospital with our first son, my husband and I had talked about it beforehand, that out of respect to her, we would call her to let her know. I mean, hey, to say, Mom, your first grandson is being born right now. We wanted you to know. And my husband made that call, and she hung up on him. She said, I can't talk to you, and she hung up on him.
And that's usually the highlight of Al is a grandparent. I mean, that's the highlight really of age, is to have a grandchild. Unbelievable.
Exactly. Yeah.
Oh.
And she had told me in written in emails, and obviously I had no question. She would love to have grandchildren, but the problem is she's so indoctrinated and fearful and living a lie that she was, that was more important to her.
The way that this organization just rips families apart is just so shocking. And another thing that has come up through the discussions so far is just the hard labor that everybody does as adults and apparently as kids too. Now, you and your husband, you sued for compensation for labor. Am I correct, or maybe I misunderstood?
There were a number of factors. It was labor law violations, human trafficking, and the forced abortions that I had.
Are you comfortable talking about the forced abortions? I know some people aren't. Is that okay
to
talk about?
It's never going to be comfortable, but obviously I will talk about it. I believe it's better to expose and communicate than, that's been my own personal view. It's not something I ever talked about. My mother found out about my specific forced abortions as a result of my lawsuit, which was 10 years after the fact of them happening. I'm just saying that as a factor. It was not something I ever discussed, even with my own husband while I was in. Mark and I never, there's no freedom of communication between members.
This is, it's such a political bomb. I mean, for lack of a better word, in the United States right now, this whole issue of abortion. And here's this organization posing, should I say, as a church, as a religious organization, and then forcing, what is their justification to do that?
Well, essentially, they implemented this policy in, I believe, 1986 initially, or maybe shortly before, shortly afterwards. And basically, first, there's two factors as I know it. Number one is they want their members to work very, very long hours. Obviously, previously children were allowed, but as the years went by, and obviously having a child is a huge commitment, and even because of the neglect and child abuse that was occurring because the parents were not allowed to raise their children, they started having a lot of problems with many of the children who were raised in this organization. It was viewed as a distraction. So therefore, they implemented, that no, if you're going to join this organization, you're not allowed to have children. And that then turned into any member that got pregnant was forced to have an abortion. And that then tied into anyone who wants to leave. The only reason they want to leave is because they've committed crimes against the organization. So it became a very evil ball of wax in a very short period of time.
Oh, that is. Now, how long did a pregnancy go before they would enforce this abortion policy?
I mean, I honestly knew of somebody who was 6 months pregnant and then went through with an abortion.
Oh, that is absolutely where do they?
No, I know it is. I know. I mean, trust me. You know, I mean,
see,
and I knew of other people that had refused and then were on heavy manual labor and sex checking and segregation. And it's important to understand the segregation is from everybody, your spouse. There's no discussion. You're not allowed, you know, a discussion with one's spouse is considered a crime because it's a violation of their policy that's called leaving and leaves. Obviously, if you're considering having a child, that involves leaving. So therefore, you're banned from talking to your spouse about it.
Talk about an emotional burden. I mean, you can't even talk to your spouse. And then
right.
Having the burden, especially if you wanted the child, I take it that you wanted the child when you were forced to have to.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, you know, I always wanted children. Anybody who knew me before or after, and now, I mean, hey, I'm 8 months pregnant with my third child, you know.
Yeah, exactly. Gosh. Now, are you still going through, a lot of people talk about like the post-traumatic stress syndrome of leaving, you know, after they have left Scientology. How long has it been since you've been in the organization?
Actually, January 24th is my 8th anniversary of my escape. So that's 8 years. And yes, absolutely, I've dealt with extreme, you know, severe post-traumatic stress from, I mean, my husband Mark and I, at a certain point, we both realized we were each having horrific nightmares about being back there and being trapped and being separated and on and on and on. And you know, I mean, it was like 3 years before we each realized, hey, we're both having the same nightmares. And anyone that we've talked to since then that has left had the exact same thing. Extreme nightmares, you know, emotional trauma, I mean, depression, you know, it's a huge process. I mean, especially for me, growing up in Scientology, a huge part of it was sorting through the mess of what I'd been indoctrinated on, brainwashed to believe, and so forth since the age of 4. How do you sort through all that and gain your own thoughts back?
Exactly. Now, your husband, Mark, was he in it as a child too, or did
yes, he wasn't in the SEA organization as a child, but his mother essentially had him doing courses in Scientology from the age of 6. He has a book that's called, the title is Blown for Good, Behind the Iron Curtain of Scientology, that thoroughly covers his indoctrination into Scientology at a very young age and how he then joined the SEA organization at age 16.
How do you feel about your children getting involved in any kind of religion at this point?
Well, for sure, you know, there's no way. I mean, I've told people many times, over my dead body, would they have any exposure to any cult? You know, I've given a lot of thought to that, and I want them to have their own views. But on the other hand, to me, I'm not going to raise them in a religion. I myself, I'm not going to be ready to talk about religion for a very long time, if ever. You know, I'm willing to hear other people's views. I have total respect for what people believe in, but myself personally, you know, I'm still on my road to recovery of my own.
Yeah, you're well. Claire,